I like the content that I'm producing right now. It's intellectually stimulating. It's a reflection of a lot of the self-discovery I've done over the past few years. It's distinctly different from what I was doing before, which I also really like. And I like the idea of reinvention. I like the idea that someone can take a mindset that they have or who they are as a creative and extrapolate that to something different, distinctly different, and be able to succeed in both of the aspects that they applied it. And I feel that a big reason why things either succeed or fail, especially when it's kind of these one person type of enterprises like a YouTuber can be, is does the creator actually like the content that they're producing or not? Because when I look at Yap Sessions, I like the content. I think it's interesting. I think the idea of the title Yap Session 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and having a steady flow of content that I can produce every day, to me, that's a interesting thing. And I think that at one point when hopefully the series gets bigger, people will come back to these earlier sessions and watch them and binge them because they found, let's say, Yap Session 54, and they want to go back and watch 48 and then 13 and then 3 and then 7 and then 94. And they're interested in both the way that the videos are presented and the actual content of the words that I'm saying. And I recently did this with a series called Discord Memes. This was probably 4 or 5 months ago now. Looking back on it, I think I just wanted to see if I still had it in me, if I still had the ability to create things that could be big and go viral. And it was definitely a very short-cutted process. I was aggregating unpermissioned content, and within 12 videos, they blew up. One of them had over 1 million views. They were 8 minutes long, and I felt that I was very creatively engaged with what I was doing. Now, this wasn't a long-term type of project that could exist due to its nature of being unpermissioned aggregated content, but it was proof that if I'm genuinely enjoying the products that I'm making, and there's a certain feeling that I get from creating this type of content and just enjoying it and seeing it as cool and being motivated to continue producing it, I think are actually the most important qualities of making something succeed is persistence, is being able to persist at something. But the underlying reason behind persistence has to be there. There has to be an understanding by the person who is persisting that what they're doing is worth their time, because when humans make decisions, we go through something called an action success calculator. And when we decide to do something or not to do something, our brain makes a calculation. Are the things that are good that could come out of this scenario, do they outweigh the things that are bad that could come out of this scenario? And if the answer is yes, then we're going to do it. And when people have failure after failure after failure after failure, and they continue to work and they continue to do things, it's because there is a reason embedded in that. There is a reason for them to continue going. They don't do it for no reason whatsoever. A lot of people who end up being able to be successful is out of stubbornness or a creative perspective on the world and a creative perspective on success, because I think a creative perspective on success is required to be able to actually see your way through to the end, even after failure after failure after failure. But the nature of failure to me is very interesting. I think that the rate of failure is actually what defines success. If I'm going to work with someone, one of the things that I'm really, really interested in knowing is how many times have you failed? Because failure tells two primary things. And one is, how many lessons has this person learned as a result? So like if this person has failed in a certain field 1,000 times, that means they know 1,000 things that don't work. They've tried 1,000 different ideas, and within all of those ideas, there are little semi-ideas and small little, to get really specific about it, synapses that have fired in the brain, that when a synapse fires in the brain and it hits a wall, then your brain knows not to fire that synapse again in that direction. And so you start to build this understanding through failure about what is the most efficient pathway through to succeed at something. I think this is very reflective of how nature works. When water starts to run into a wall, what does water do? Water starts to flow around the wall, or it starts to build up, or it starts to amount more pressure against the wall. And given enough time, that water will find its way through that wall. I mean, look at the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is the result of a river slowly slicing its way through rock over millions and millions of years. So if a river can slice its way through rock given enough time and persistence, then persistence is really the only thing that matters when it comes to success. I've noticed that there are a lot of comments on this channel that ask about the Texas Beach content, the Club Penguin Ruin stuff, the memes by Cowbelly, a lot of the past projects that I've done. And this is interesting because the nature of being a creative is that you work on something and you're initially passionate about it and it's very interesting to you and you're able to create something cool. You're able to synthesize something cool. And that thing kind of gets big and a lot of people enjoy it. And it's the nature of being a creative person that once you have created that thing and you get used to it and you get used to creating it, the creative part of your brain then wants to move on. It wants to go and do something else. It wants to explore something new. I think that's just the nature of moving on. That's the nature of evolution. That's the nature of change. And it's interesting how a lot of people simply remember the things that you've done in the past, the things that have worked historically, let's say, are the money makers, because the money makers are what society has deemed as valuable, and it makes perfect sense that people would want to see the things that society has deemed valuable in the past. And so I think there's this golden period where you are completely engrossed in the work, society sees value in it, and those two things are the creative producer's interest is at its height and society's interest is at its height, and that's kind of the peak of, I would say, the greatness or the golden times, let's say, that a lot of people consider when they look back and they have nostalgia for a certain thing, whether it's the Texas Beach content or Club Penguin Ruined or really anything that's had a golden period in the past. I think that's where you have a person who's the creative force behind it is genuinely interested and passionate in building the product, and they don't feel like they've hit a wall, or they don't feel like they can reinvent the product or continue adding anything to it, and society is very interested in using it or consuming it or being involved with it. And those, it's interesting, that relationship that services or products or videos or anything that you create has in terms of your relationship and other people's relationship with it. And so I think it's good to acknowledge that change and how that functions. But for some reason, oil is popping into my head right now. The example of how over millions and millions and millions of years, how like leaves and branches or like plants and stuff get crushed with a tremendous amount of power. And it wasn't until millions and millions of years later that human beings figured out how to extract and use oil and make it an incredibly efficient resource. And that makes me think that on a long enough time scale, stuff will have a second arc. It will have a second birth. It will have a rebirth at some point. Or like enjoying old movies. Because the leaves and everything, it had an initial use, right? It was nature. It was nature doing its thing. But knowledge was actually the thing, and then the recognition that oil could even be used as a tool for transformation in society is so interesting to me. That knowledge was actually the thing that unlocked that, because knowledge makes resources infinite. And I'm getting this from a guy named Naval, but he was talking about how to a caveman, there is no use for oil. And cavemen simply didn't understand the potential. But the more we know about something, the more we're able to unlock more efficient aspects of it. And the more that technology grows, who knows what things are in abundance now that could become incredibly useful or leverageable in the future that right now we have no understanding of how to properly leverage. Attention to detail, to me, I think is always a very fundamental aspect of being able to build something of quality. Details are interesting. I've always been a very detail-oriented person. Like when I worked with creators in the Memes by Cowbelly channel, I would review memes with them and we would go back and forth on the process of making a meme. And I would often really zero in on details like, oh, let's get this rotoscope perfect, or, oh, let's, make sure the lighting is proper this way. Or I'm trying to remember, there was this one meme that we made. I think it had to do with Monsters, Inc. And I was editing it with Yilmaz or Yilmio. And there was just something that wasn't correct about it. And over a 3 or 4 day period, I just continually was like, we got to get it right. The rotoscope doesn't quite look right. The rotoscope, you got to remove this little bit and this little bit. And at this second, you got to remove this little bit. And at the end, we had a great product. And greatness, what people perceive as great, what people see as great, is not the big picture. Like when you see, let's say you see a dirty floor. When you see the floor, like the average person is seeing a floor and they're looking at the floor and they say, oh, that's a dirty floor. They're not looking at each individual little speck. They're not seeing each individual speck of dirt. They're seeing the whole floor, and they're saying, hey, these specks as a collective, that makes this a dirty floor. And greatness is about being able to pay attention to each one of those details and being, let's say you want to clean the floor, you have to take out all those things. But when you're down at a sub level, when you're down at a microscopic level and these pieces of dirt seem huge, it's easy to dismiss them because there's a lot of them. And it's easy to say, it's not worth picking out this one singular piece of dirt because there are so many others next to it. Or you're looking at the whole floor, and if you were to pick up each one piece of dirt at a time, then it would become a clean floor. But if you pick up one piece of dirt, it's not a clean floor. So my point in saying this is that there's a phrase that people like to say, and they say the devil is in the details. I like to turn this phrase on its head and say God is in the details, not in any religious type of way, but just to kind of put a positive connotation on the phrase and saying that making something great is about paying attention to the very, very small details of it, and making processes that effectively address details is really, really hard, but one of the instrumental things that I feel dictates the success or failure of a product. So, yeah. Cool. Well, appreciate your time today. Hope this was a good Yap session for you, and I'll speak with you soon. Peace.